The scent of rosemary wafted through my kitchen on December 23rd. A bitter reminder of 20 years spent crafting perfect holiday memories for a family that looked right through me. I'd been up since dawn, carefully selecting the plumpest turkey. At Wilson's Market, my hands working on autopilot as they massaged herbs under its skin. A recipe Ethan had always claimed made Christmas feel like home. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 5 when I heard the front door open. My son's footsteps, more confident than ever in his new leather Oxfords, echoed through our Boston suburban home. I wiped my hands on my apron, ready to embrace him. But Ethan breezed past me like I was part of the furniture. "Dad!" he called out, his voice brimming with excitement. "Got the annual bonus today." Richard emerged from his study, and I watched from the kitchen doorway as father and son embraced. My husband's salt and pepper hair caught the warm light from our crystal chandelier, the one I polished every Sunday without fail. The rest of the family filtered in. My in-laws George and Margaret, Richard's brother Stephen and Ethan's wife, Ashley, their voices creating a chorus of celebration that made me feel like a stranger in my own home. I stood there, invisible, as Ethan began distributing envelopes with the flourish of a game show host. "Dad, this is for you. A $1,000 gift card to that golf club you've been eyeing." Richard's eyes lit up. "Grandma and Grandpa, day at the Wellington Spa." Margaret clasped her hands in delight. "Uncle Stephen and Aunt Ashley, gourmet dining vouchers for that new French place downtown." The room buzzed with thank yous and excited chatter until Ashley, sweet Ashley, noticed my empty hands. "What about Susan?" she asked, her voice soft, with concern. Ethan's face flickered with something. Was it annoyance? Before he reached into his pocket. "Oh, right. Almost forgot." He walked over to Oliver, our Siamese cat recovering from kidney surgery, and tucked an envelope into his collar with a theatrical wink. But that wasn't the worst part. Standing tall in his tailored suit, Ethan announced his grand surprise. "I've booked an incredible New Year's trip for everyone. Hot air balloon ride over the Grand Canyon, luxury resort in Scottsdale, presidential suite in Vegas, all using the miles from Mom's credit card account." The room erupted in cheers. I felt the blood drain from my face. My credit card, my miles, without my knowledge or permission. "Mom will stay home to take care of Oliver," Ethan continued, smirking. "After all, nobody's better at that kind of thing." 20 years of Christmas cookies, bandaged knees, and midnight fevers reduced to this, a live-in pet sitter. The crystal cookie platter in my hand suddenly felt too heavy, too symbolic of everything I'd carried for this family. Without thinking, I let it crash to the floor, sending shortbread stars shattering across the hardwood I'd waxed just yesterday. The silence was deafening. Richard's voice cut through it like ice. "If you can't behave properly, Susan, perhaps you should leave." In that moment, something inside me, something that had been bending for decades, finally broke free. Standing there amid the shattered cookies, I saw my life reflected in those broken pieces. 20 years ago, I'd been Susan Mitchell, a promising art conservation graduate student at Boston University, specializing in rare book restoration. My professors called me gifted. I could spend hours hunched over centuries-old volumes, carefully bringing worn pages back to life with precise hands and unwavering patience. The same hands that now spent their days cooking meals nobody bothered. To compliment and folding laundry nobody bothered to notice. I met Richard at a faculty dinner. He was a rising star in corporate finance, and I was there helping my advisor catalog some ancient manuscripts the university had recently acquired. He seemed fascinated by my passion for preservation, or At least he pretended to be. Your dedication to protecting beautiful things is remarkable, he'd said, his blue eyes twinkling. I still remember how my heart fluttered at those words. When I became pregnant with Ethan 2 years into our marriage, Richard suggested I take a break from my studies. "Just until the baby's walking," he said. "We can afford it, and nothing's more important than family." Those words became a mantra, repeated every time I mentioned returning to work. First it was, "Ethan needs his mother." Then, "My job is so demanding, I need you to manage things at home." Later, "Why work when we're doing so well?" I poured everything into being the perfect wife and mother. I learned to cook gourmet meals, maintained an immaculate home, and orchestrated every birthday party, holiday celebration, and family gathering with the same precision I once used to restore medieval bindings. I kept detailed records of everyone's preferences. Richard's shirt starched just so, Ethan's sandwiches cut diagonally with the crusts removed, even Oliver's special diet when his kidneys started failing. My mother, Mary, watched it all with quiet concern. "Susan," she'd say during our weekly calls, "you're disappearing into their lives." But I'd laugh it off, tell her I was living the American dream, beautiful home in suburban Boston, successful husband, brilliant son. What more could any woman want? Yet there were moments when my old self would surface, usually late at night when everyone was asleep. I'd pull out my conservation tools, kept pristine in their leather case, and run my fingers over the bone folders and awls. Sometimes I'd pick up a used book from the local store and repair its binding, just to remember who I used to be. These small acts of restoration became my secret rebellion, my way of preserving not just books, but pieces of my former self. Last month, I found my old student ID while cleaning the attic. The young woman in the photo stared back at me with clear eyes and a confident smile. Her whole future spread before her like an unwritten page. I barely recognized her. That night, I stayed up late looking through conservation journals online, reading about new techniques and technologies I'd never had the chance to learn. The ache in my chest felt like homesickness for a place I'd never left. And now here I stood, surrounded by broken cookies and broken illusions, while my son, my beautiful boy, who once couldn't sleep without holding my hand, casually gave away my airline miles and relegated me to pet-sitting duty. The same miles I'd earned from 2 decades of grocery shopping, buying school supplies, and managing household expenses. They hadn't just taken my present, they'd assumed ownership of my future too. I looked down at my trembling hands, still dusted with cookie flour and turkey seasonings. These hands that had given so much, protected so much, preserved so much for others. What had they preserved for me? The next few minutes played out like a carefully choreographed dance of dysfunction. Richard stepped forward, his designer loafers crunching over broken cookie pieces, and gripped my arm with just enough pressure to seem concerned rather than controlling. "Susan," he said in that patronizing tone he'd perfected over the years, "why don't you go upstairs and compose yourself? I'll have Rosa come early tomorrow to clean this up." Rosa, our twice-weekly housekeeper whom I'd insisted we didn't need. "You're being prideful," Richard had said when he hired her. "A woman of your standing shouldn't be on her hands and knees, scrubbing floors." What he meant was, a woman of his standing shouldn't have a wife who did manual labor. Now I understood. It had never been about lightening my load, but about maintaining appearances. "I'll clean it up myself," I said, kneeling to gather the larger pieces. Ashley moved to help me, but Ethan pulled her back with a sharp tug. "Mom's having one of her moments," he stage whispered as if I couldn't hear him from 3 feet away. Remember last Thanksgiving when she got upset because we decided to go to your parents' house instead? That wasn't what had happened at all. They hadn't decided. They'd announced it at the dinner table after I'd already spent weeks preparing. After I'd special ordered an organic turkey and handmade place cards for everyone. But that's how it always went in our house. My feelings were moments. My objections were drama. And my memories were rewritten to cast me as the unstable one. Perhaps we should discuss the New Year's trip another time, Margaret offered, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. When Susan is feeling more rational. I looked up from the floor to see George nodding sagely. Women of a certain age, he pronounced as if reading from some ancient text of patriarchal wisdom, often struggle with emotional regulation. Richard, remember how your mother got before she started taking those lovely pills? The room murmured. In agreement, and I watched as 20 years of carefully constructed family mythology crystallized in front of me. Every time I'd expressed hurt, disappointment, or anger, it had been catalogued and categorized as evidence of my instability. Every protest had been smoothed over with patronizing concerns about my mental state. Even now, as I knelt among the physical evidence of my breaking point, they were doing it again. Richard was already on his phone, probably texting our family doctor for a prescription of those lovely pills. Ethan was patting Ashley's hand, playing the role of concerned son dealing with his difficult mother. Stephen was checking his watch, no doubt calculating how long social convention required him to stay in the presence of such uncomfortable emotions. I have your Miles account login, Mom, Ethan said suddenly, his voice bright with forced cheer. I'll take care of changing the travel dates. Maybe we can find a nice spa retreat for you instead? Something quiet with lots of rest? The last word landed like a gentle threat. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized what was happening. They weren't just gaslighting me anymore. They were actively working to sideline me, to turn my legitimate anger into evidence of mental instability. The family's solution to my moments was becoming increasingly clear. Medicate, isolate, control. I stood up slowly, cookie crumbs falling from my apron. The kitchen still smelled of rosemary and sage, but now it felt cloying, suffocating. As I looked around at these familiar faces I'd loved and served and centered my life around, I saw something I'd been blind to for years. They weren't just taking me for granted. They were systematically erasing me. I didn't sleep that night. After the family left, with Richard making a show of helping me upstairs, to rest, I sat at my vanity, staring at my reflection in the soft glow of my reading lamp. The woman looking back at me seemed both familiar and foreign, like a photograph that's been subtly altered. I touched my face, tracing the fine lines around my eyes that I'd always attributed to aging, but now recognized as something else. The marks of years spent squinting into gaslights. At 2 a.m., I opened my laptop, the one Richard had given me, to browse recipes and shop online. My hands trembled slightly as I logged into my bank account. 20 years of marriage, and I'd never thought to question why Richard insisted on keeping our finances separate, with him managing the major accounts, while I maintained a modest checking account for household expenses. The Miles account was already locked. Of course, Ethan had probably changed the password the moment he got home. But he'd forgotten something crucial. The account was still linked to my email. Within minutes, I had reset the password and was staring at the screen in disbelief. Over 800,000 miles, accumulated through years of family purchases, all of them earned on my credit card, which I now realized had been strategically given to me to handle all household expenses, while Richard kept his own rewards for business travel. I opened a new browser tab and pulled up my credit card. Statements from the past year. Every charge told a story. $478 at the organic butcher for Ethan's graduation party. $892 at the florist for Margaret's birthday celebration. $200 at the wine merchant for Richard's client dinner at our home. Thousands of dollars spent making other people's lives more comfortable, more impressive, more Instagram-worthy. Then I did something I'd never done before. I started taking screenshots. Every major purchase, every family celebration I'd funded, every airline mile earned. I created a folder on my computer named Recipes and stored everything there. Something in me had shifted. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was awakening. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Just checking on you, sweetheart. Call me when you can." Mary, my practical, resilient mother, who'd recently sold our old family home in Providence, who'd raised me alone after Dad died, working as a librarian while getting her real estate license at night, who'd never once told me how to live my life, but whose silence had spoken volumes. I didn't call her yet. Instead, I spent the next few hours methodically documenting everything. I photographed the contents of my jewelry box, every piece Richard had given me to wear at his corporate events. I took pictures of the handwritten meal plans I'd created for Oliver's kidney condition, the detailed shopping lists, the calendar filled with everyone's appointments and preferences. When dawn began to creep through the windows, I finally allowed myself to open the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside lay my old leather case of bookbinding tools, untouched for years but still perfectly maintained. I ran my fingers over each instrument, the bone folder, the awl, the needle and thread. Tools of preservation, of restoration, of creation. They felt more real in my hands than anything else in this house. A plan was forming in my mind, as precise and methodical as the steps needed to restore a damaged book. I wouldn't confront them. Not yet. Like a skilled conservator, I would first assess the damage, gather my materials, and prepare my workspace. After all, wasn't that what I'd been trained to do? To take something broken and carefully, deliberately bring it back to life? The irony wasn't lost on me. All these years, I'd been preserving everyone else's stories while letting my own fall apart. But like those ancient books I used to restore, my story wasn't finished. It was just waiting for the right hands to piece it back together. Christmas Eve morning arrived with a flurry of passive-aggressive text messages. Richard, hope you're feeling more balanced today. Dr. Matthews can see you at 2. Ethan, Dad's worried about you, Mom. We all are. Maybe you should take something. Even Margaret chimed in. Dear, I know a wonderful therapist who specializes in women's issues. I read each message with a strange sense of calm, like a scientist observing specimens under glass. Their concerned words, once so effective at making me doubt myself, now revealed their true nature. Controller wrapped in care, manipulation masked as love. While Richard was at his office Christmas party. Just a quick appearance, dear you, I understand. I made 2 crucial phone calls. The first was to Mary. Mom? My voice cracked slightly. Remember when you said the money from the house sale was in a special account? I need to know more. There was a pause. Then Mary's voice came through, steady and sure. I've been waiting for this call for 20 years, Susan. The money's in a high-yield investment fund, in your name only. I set it up the day after you told me Richard suggested you pause your career. My hands started shaking. How much? Your father's life insurance paid off the house. The sale cleared $487,000 with investments and compound interest. Let's just say you have options. Options. The word hit me like a burst of fresh air. While I'd been measuring my life in loads of laundry and perfectly cooked meals, my mother had been quietly building my escape route. The second call was to Rachel Goldman, a divorce attorney whose card I'd picked up months ago at my yoga studio and hidden inside my old conservation textbook. I'd told myself I was just being thorough, the same way I kept spare buttons for every garment in the house. Now, sitting in my immaculate kitchen, I realized I'd been preparing for this moment all along. "I can see you tomorrow morning," Rachel said after hearing a brief overview. "Bring any financial documents you can access. And Susan, start recording everything. Every conversation, every text. Massachusetts is a two-party consent state for recordings, so be strategic about when and how you document things." I spent the next few hours moving through the house with purpose, photographing valuable items and downloading bank statements. I created a new email account on my phone, forwarding copies of every manipulative message I had received. Then I did something that would have been unthinkable just days ago. I booked a hotel room in downtown Boston using my own credit card. The last task was the hardest. I knelt beside Oliver, who was lounging in his favorite sunny spot by the bay window. "I'm sorry, sweet boy," I whispered, scratching behind his ears. "But I'm going to make sure you're taken care of." I called our vet, Dr. Chen, and arranged to board him there, using the emergency fund I'd maintained for his medical care. "We'll monitor his kidney function daily," she assured me. "He'll be comfortable here." At 1:45 p.m., when I should have been heading to Dr. Matthews' office, I was instead packing a small suitcase with essentials. My hand hesitated over my jewelry box before taking only the pieces I'd bought myself or inherited from my father's side. The rest? The golden handcuffs Richard had placed on me year after year, I left arranged precisely on their velvet cushions. I changed my personal passwords, removed my devices from the family's shared Find My iPhone account, and transferred half the money from our joint household account to my private one. Everything legal, everything I was entitled to, but actions that would nonetheless be painted as proof of my instability. The last thing I packed was my leather case of bookbinding tools. "When you restore a book," my old professor used to say, "you're not just fixing pages, you're preserving someone's voice." I finally understood. It was time to restore my own voice, to piece together the scattered pages of my identity that had been slowly, deliberately pulled apart. The confrontation began fittingly enough in the kitchen, the room where I'd spent countless hours keeping everyone else's lives running smoothly. I was placing my suitcase by the door when Richard stormed in, his face flushed with the particular shade of red reserved for moments when his control was slipping. "Where the hell were you?" he demanded. "Dr. Matthews called to say you missed your appointment. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? I had to leave the office party early." I stood at the granite island, the one I'd selected years, ago because it matched the color of Richard's eyes, and noticed for the first time how the veins in the stone resembled chains. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "I've already taken Oliver to the vet for boarding." "You what?" Richard's hand went to his phone. "I'm calling Dr. Matthews right now. This is exactly what I was worried about. You're not thinking clearly." "Actually," I said, pulling out my own phone, "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. Would you like to hear some of my thoughts? I recorded them, along with some interesting family conversations from yesterday." I played a short clip of his earlier threats about my mental state. The color drained from his face. "That's illegal. In Massachusetts, yes. That's why I only recorded the conversations where I clearly stated I was doing so. You were all too busy talking over me to notice." I smiled, remembering how they'd ignored my quiet. I should document this for posterity. Before their tirade began, the front door opened and Ethan burst in. "Dad, what's going on? Ashley said Mom's car is at the vet's office." "Your mother," Richard spat, "has apparently lost her mind. She's recording us threatening to leave." "I'm not threatening," I interrupted. "I'm informing. And Ethan, since you're here, I've changed the Miles account password. You'll need to make new travel arrangements that don't involve stealing from me." "Stealing?" Ethan's face contorted into the same expression he'd worn as a teenager when caught lying. "Mom, they're just airline miles. And it's not like you. We're using them for anything important." "Anything important?" I repeated softly. "Like my life? My dreams? My identity?" "Oh God, here we go again." Ethan rolled his eyes. "Dad's right. You need help. Professional help. You can't just throw away 20 years of family over some stupid airline miles." I picked up my apron from its hook, the one embroidered, with "World's Best Mom," that had always felt more like a job description than a term of endearment. "You're right, Ethan. Not over airline miles, but over 20 years of being treated like a servant. Over watching my son become a man who thinks it's acceptable to steal from his mother and then gaslight her about it. Over realizing that my husband sees me as an asset to be managed rather than a partner to be cherished. Yes, over that. I can throw it all away." Richard stepped toward me, his voice dropping into the smooth, patronizing tone he used for difficult clients. "Susan, darling, let's discuss this rationally. Whatever you think is wrong, we can fix it. Just put down the suitcase. Take your medication." "My medication," I cut in, "was prescribed for anxiety that came from trying to be perfect for people who saw me as furniture. The only thing I need to fix is my acceptance of being treated this way." I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope. "These are divorce papers. My lawyer will be in touch about the rest." "Divorce?" Richard laughed, but I caught the nervous edge in it. "On what grounds?" "My favorite is the financial manipulation, documented in great detail. Though I'm particularly proud of the spreadsheet tracking every time you've threatened me with psychiatric intervention when I expressed independent thoughts. Rachel, that's my lawyer, says it's one of the most comprehensive cases of gaslighting she's seen." "You ungrateful bitch," Ethan snarled, sounding so much like his father that my heart broke all over again after everything we've done for you. "No," I said quietly. "After everything I've done for you. And that's the last time you'll speak to me that way." I picked up my suitcase and walked to the door, turning back one last time. "Oh, and Richard, you might want to call your accountant. Mother's house sale money. It's in a trust, in my name only. Established long before any of this. Completely untouchable." The look of dawning horror on their faces as they realized they'd lost their power over me was something I'd remember forever. Not with pleasure. There was no joy in watching love curdle into manipulation exposed, but with the quiet satisfaction of a conservator who has finally removed centuries of damaging varnish from a priceless work of art, revealing its true beauty underneath. The Boston Harbor Hotel felt like another world. After 20 years of maintaining a 4-bedroom colonial in the suburbs, the simplicity of a single room with crisp white linens and an ocean view was startlingly beautiful. I stood at the window, watching boats drift across the harbor, and felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Possibility. My phone buzzed constantly that first night. Richard, Ethan, Margaret, even Ashley. But I let their messages pile up unread. Instead, I opened my laptop and did something I'd been dreaming about for longer than I cared to admit. I Googled Rare Book Conservation Jobs Boston. The results made my heart race. The Boston Athenaeum was seeking a part-time conservation specialist. Harvard's Houghton Library had an opening in their preservation department. The Boston Public Library needed someone to help restore their collection of 18th century manuscripts. 20 years ago, these would have been my dream jobs. Now, looking at the required skills and experience, I felt the weight of those lost years. But then I noticed something else. Many listings mentioned traditional bookbinding skills as a desired qualification. My fingers went to my leather tool case, touching each familiar implement. While the world had moved forward with new conservation technologies, these fundamental tools hadn't changed in centuries. Neither had the techniques I'd learned, techniques I'd kept alive through small secret projects all these years. I ordered room service, a simple soup and salad that I didn't have to cook for anyone else, and began drafting emails to my old professors at Boston University. "Dear Dr. Harrison," I wrote, "you may not remember me, but 20 years ago, you told me I had a natural gift for book conservation." To my surprise, responses started coming in within hours. "Susan, of course I remember you. Your work on that 1780s almanac was extraordinary. Where have you been?" wrote Dr. Harrison. "We must meet for coffee. The field has missed talents like yours." Shh. Around midnight, I finally opened one message from Richard. "Your behavior is embarrassing the entire family. What will people think?" I laughed out loud, a real laugh, one that bubbled up from deep inside. For the first time, I truly didn't care what people would think. Instead, I cared what I thought, what I felt, what I wanted. I ran a bath in the hotel's deep soaking tub, another luxury I'd denied myself for years. As I soaked, I opened my mother's latest text. "Just check the trust account. Everything's secure. Take all the time you need to find yourself, sweetheart. You've got more than enough resources to do it right." Resources. The word hit differently. Now, all those years I'd thought of resources in terms of what I could give others. Time, energy, care, money. Now I had resources for myself. Financial security, professional contacts, and most importantly, the clarity to use them. Dr. Chen sent a photo of Oliver, curled up contentedly in his boarding suite, with a note. "His kidney values are stable. He's actually less stressed here than he was at home." Another piece of guilt lifted from my shoulders. Even my cat was doing better away from that toxic environment. Before sleep, I did something I hadn't done since graduate school. I took out my old conservation tools and began working on a small leather-bound journal I'd bought years ago, but never used. My hands remembered every movement, how to fold the signatures, how to sew the binding, how to shape the spine. As I worked, I realized I was creating something new. Not just a book, but a vessel for my own story. On the first page, I wrote, "The Conservation of Susan Mitchell," and below it, in smaller text, "A complete restoration of a life nearly lost." The irony made me smile. I'd spent 20 years preserving everyone else's stories while letting mine gather dust. But like the ancient books I once restored, my story wasn't ending. It was simply beginning a new chapter. I fell asleep to the sound of waves against the harbor wall, my conservation tools laid out beside me, like old friends welcomed home. For the first time in decades, I didn't set an alarm. Tomorrow would unfold at my own pace, shaped by my own choices, restored by my own hands. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a blur of purposeful activity. While Richard and Ethan were presumably enjoying their stolen miles in Vegas, I was reconstructing my life with the same methodical care I once used to restore damaged manuscripts. My first meeting with Rachel, my lawyer, set the tone. "You've done everything right," she said, reviewing my documentation. "The separate trust account, the recordings, the photographs. You've given me a solid foundation to work with." She paused, studying me over her reading glasses. "But Susan, I need to know, are you prepared for how ugly this might get?" I thought about the text messages already piling up on my phone. Richard had progressed from concerned manipulation, "Darling, everyone's worried sick," to thinly veiled threats. "You'll regret making a public spectacle of yourself." Ethan had alternated between guilt trips. "Oliver misses you. How could you abandon him?" And financial panic. "Dad says you've frozen the household account." "They've already shown me their ugliest sides," I replied. "I'm not afraid anymore." Rachel nodded approvingly. "Good, because here's what we're going to do." She outlined a strategy that made me wish I'd found her years ago. Within hours, she'd filed for an emergency hearing to prevent Richard from accessing my trust fund, or Miles' account, citing the documented pattern of financial control. My next stop was Boston University, where Dr. Harrison had arranged a meeting with the current conservation faculty. Walking into the preservation lab felt like stepping through time. The familiar scent of leather and paste, the soft rustle of acid-free paper, the gleam of brass tools. Everything was exactly as I remembered, yet somehow fresher, full of new possibility. "Conservation techniques have evolved," Dr. Harrison explained, showing me their new digital imaging equipment. "But the fundamentals you mastered, they're still the foundation of everything we do." She hesitated, then added, "We're launching a certificate program for mid-career professionals looking to enter or return to the field. It's part-time, designed for people with other commitments." My heart leapt. "When does it start?" "February. Though," she smiled, "I could arrange for you to audit some current classes while you wait. Keep those hands busy." I spent the afternoon in their lab, handling rare books and discussing preservation techniques with graduate students who could have been me 2 decades ago. One of them, a young woman named Maya, watched in fascination as I demonstrated an 18th century binding technique. "Where did you learn that?" she asked. "It's not in any of our manuals." "Some things can't be learned from manuals," I replied, remembering my own apprenticeship days. "They have to be passed down, hand to hand, generation to generation." That evening, back in my hotel room, I opened my laptop to find an email from the Boston Athenaeum. They wanted to interview me for a part-time position supervising their conservation volunteers. "Your traditional training combined with your organizational skills make you an intriguing candidate," the curator wrote. Organizational skills. I almost laughed. All those years of managing a household, tracking everyone's schedules, maintaining detailed records of medications and meals and preferences. They weren't wasted time after all. They were just being applied to the wrong. Books. I celebrated by ordering room service. Lobster this time. My newfound freedom deserved more than soup. And calling my mother, I applied to a certificate program, I told her, and I have a job interview. "Of course you do," Mary replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "You know what I always say about books? That they're waiting to be read? That, and they're patient. A book can sit unopened for years, decades even. But the story inside doesn't fade. It just waits for the right moment, the right reader, to bring it back to life." She paused. "Just like you, sweetheart. Just like you." Later, as I worked on my practice journal, I realized my hands were steady. Sure, The trembling that had plagued me in Richard's house was gone. Every fold, every stitch was precise, deliberate. I was no longer trying to hold together someone else's idea of a perfect life. Instead, I was crafting my own, page by carefully restored page. They returned from Las Vegas on January 2nd, and the real siege began. I was in the Athenaeum's conservation lab, examining a damaged first edition with the curator, when my phone started buzzing incessantly. First Richard, then Ethan, then a flood of flying monkeys. Margaret, Stephen, even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. "Susan, your credit card was declined." Richard's voice dripped with false concern in his voicemail. "I've had to cover all the household expenses. Is this really how you want to handle things?" I smiled, remembering Rachel's advice. Let him spend his own money for once. Document everything. The joint account had been closed, my credit cards canceled and replaced with new ones in my name only. Every purchase Richard made now was creating a paper trail of household expenses, evidence for the divorce proceedings. Ethan's messages were more desperate. "Mom, this is insane. I had to take a cash advance to pay my credit card bill. Dad says you've locked us out of everything." Translation: the credit cards I'd unknowingly been paying for years, cards in their names, linked to my accounts, were finally deactivated. My son was facing the consequences of his financial dependence for the first time. I waited until my lunch break to listen to the rest. "Margaret, think about what this is doing to Richard's reputation at the firm." "Stephen, you're tearing this family apart." And the coup de grace, Ashley's tearful message. "Ethan had to cancel our Valentine's spa weekend. How could you be so selfish?" The selfishness accusation hit differently now. After my morning at the Athenaeum, surrounded by centuries old, books that had survived because someone cared enough to preserve them, I understood something. Self-preservation isn't selfish. It's necessary, essential, sacred even. I was crafting a careful response to Ashley when Rachel's number flashed on my screen. "They're making moves," she said without preamble. "Richard's lawyer is pushing for a psychological evaluation. They're trying to paint your departure as a mental health crisis." "Of course they are," I replied, thinking of the detailed records I'd kept. "What do we do?" "We counter with your new job interview, the certificate program acceptance, the perfectly stable boarding arrangements for Oliver. Show the court this isn't a breakdown. It's a breakthrough." That evening, I returned to my hotel room to find a massive flower arrangement. Richard's classic manipulation tactic. The card read, "Darling, let's talk this through rationally, like adults." The old Susan would have melted at this gesture, seen it as a sign of love and reconciliation. The new Susan photographed the arrangement, documented the passive-aggressive note, and forwarded everything to Rachel. Then I did something that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. I asked the hotel staff to remove the flowers and donate them to a nearby hospital. As they took away Richard's calculated gesture of love, my phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Grandma Mary won't answer my calls. Dad says we should be able to access that trust fund. It came from family property." I thought of my mother, steady and wise, who'd spent 20 years quietly building my escape route. Who'd known somehow that this day would come. I texted back a single sentence. "The property came from my family, not yours." Then I blocked his number. Sitting at the hotel desk that night, I pulled out my conservation tools and continued work on my journal. Each entry documented not just events, but revelations. How Richard's concerned messages revealed his panic at losing control. How Ethan's financial crisis exposed the entitled child I'd unknowingly raised. How every flying monkey's attack only proved how deeply the rot had spread through our family tree. In book conservation, I wrote, sometimes the most damaged volumes are the ones that look perfect on the outside. It's only when you begin the restoration process that you discover how thoroughly the corruption has penetrated, how acids and insects have eaten away at the structure, how hasty repairs have only hidden deeper damage. The first step isn't fixing. It's facing the truth of what's broken. I closed the journal, running my fingers over its carefully sewn binding. Outside my window, snow was falling over Boston Harbor, covering the city in a clean white silence. Tomorrow would bring more attacks, more manipulation attempts, more flying monkeys. But for the first time in decades, I was ready for them. After all, I was no longer a precious volume locked away in someone else's library. I was my own conservator now, and I knew exactly how to handle fragile, damaged things. The interview at the Boston Athenaeum changed everything. I'd prepared meticulously, wearing a charcoal gray suit I'd bought myself, not one of Richard's carefully selected outfits. And carrying my leather tool case like a talisman, the reading room's soaring ceilings and wood-paneled walls felt more like home than my house had in years. We have a rather unique challenge, Dr. Eleanor Chen, the head conservator, explained as she led me to their preservation lab. We've recently acquired a collection of 18th century merchant logs from a Massachusetts shipping family. The bindings are severely compromised, but the content is invaluable for historical research. She placed a volume in front of me. The leather was cracked, the spine partially detached, but I could see the beauty beneath the damage. Without thinking, I reached for my tools. May I? When she nodded, I began my assessment, narrating as I worked. The leather has red rot, but the sewing structure is largely intact. See how the original binder used a herringbone stitch? That's typical of New England work from this period. My hands moved with remembered confidence, examining the text block, testing the paper's stability. The primary damage is environmental, I continued. But look, someone attempted repairs in the 1950s using acidic adhesives. That's actually caused more harm than the original deterioration. I glanced up to find Dr. Chen watching me intently. The good news is, it's reversible. With the right solvents and careful handling, we could remove the damaging repairs without compromising the original structure. She smiled. That's exactly what our initial assessment concluded, though I don't recall mentioning the 1950s repairs in the job posting. You didn't. I felt a flush of pride. But I recognized the type of tape and adhesive. I did my graduate thesis on mid-20th century repair techniques and their long-term effects on historical bindings. The thesis that proposed a new method for removing pressure-sensitive tapes from vellum. Her eyes widened. That was you? I nodded, surprised she knew it. Unfortunately, I never got to implement the technique. Life took a different turn. Until now, she said quietly. Then more briskly. The position we advertised was part-time, supervising volunteers. But we've just received a grant for the Merchant Logs project. We need someone who understands both traditional techniques and the chemistry of modern conservation. Someone who can train others while doing hands-on work themselves. She paused. Would you be interested in something more substantial? My heart raced. The certificate program can be completed alongside this position. In fact, she smiled, we'd encourage it. The Athenaeum has always believed in nurturing talent. Later that afternoon, I sat in my hotel room holding the formal offer letter. The salary was modest compared to Richard's income, But combined with my trust fund, it was more than enough. More importantly, it was mine. Earned by my knowledge, my skills, my passion. My phone buzzed. Richard again. The country club board meets tonight. How do you expect me to explain your absence? Everyone's asking questions. I thought about the merchant logs waiting in the Athenaeum's lab. Books that had survived centuries of neglect, poor repairs, and environmental damage, yet still held their stories intact. Books that, with proper care and expertise, could be restored to their former glory. Books that, like me, had been silently waiting for the right hands to heal them. I typed a reply. Tell them the truth. Your wife hasn't gone mad. She's gone back to work. Then I called my mother. I got the job, I said when she answered. Full-time, with benefits. They want me to start next week. Of course they do, Mary replied. They recognize quality when they see it. She paused. Richard's been calling me, you know, trying to convince me to reason with you about the trust fund. I tensed. And I told him I'm too busy planning my trip to Paris. Always wanted to see the Bibliothèque Nationale. I could hear her smile. Their manuscript collection is supposedly extraordinary. Paris? The idea caught fire in my imagination. You're going to Paris? We're going to Paris, sweetheart. Once things settle here. After all, what better place for two women starting new chapters? I looked down at my hands. Conservator's hands. Skilled hands. My own hands. And felt the future unfurling like fresh paper, clean and full of possibility. Yes, I said. Yes to all of it. That evening, I took my journal to the hotel's restaurant and ordered a glass of champagne. On a fresh page, I wrote, Today, I restored more than books. I restored myself. My first week at the Athenaeum coincided with Richard's last desperate power play. I was teaching a group of conservation volunteers the proper technique for cleaning leather bindings when Rachel called. They're filing an emergency motion, she said without preamble. Richard's claiming temporary insanity on your behalf, citing your sudden personality change and reckless career decisions as evidence. He's requesting temporary conservatorship. The irony of the word conservatorship wasn't lost on me as I looked around the preservation lab, where I'd just spent the morning conserving things that actually mattered. Let me guess. He wants control of the trust fund. And everything else. He's painted quite a picture. Devoted husband desperately trying to protect his mentally unstable wife from herself. Claims you've been showing signs of deteriorating mental health for months. Refusing medication, making impulsive decisions. I thought of the detailed journal I'd been keeping, the recordings, the text messages. We can fight this? Better. Rachel's voice held a note of satisfaction. We can destroy it. Your new job, the certificate program acceptance, Dr. Chen's professional assessment of your skills. They all prove you're not just competent, you're excelling. Plus, I've had my investigator looking into Richard's finances since the separation. She paused meaningfully. Wanna guess what we found? The next morning, I sat in the courthouse wearing my conservator's coat, a symbol of my professional identity that felt more authentic than any outfit Richard had ever chosen for me. He arrived with an expensive-looking lawyer, his face arranged, in an expression of practiced concern. Then he saw my mother sitting beside me, and his mask slipped. The hearing was surprisingly anticlimactic. Rachel presented my job offer, professional references, and proof of Oliver's excellent care at the vet's boarding facility. She showed my organized documentation of Richard's long-term financial and emotional manipulation. Then she dropped the bomb. Evidence that Richard had been quietly moving money between accounts, preparing for his own exit strategy long before I'd found my courage. "Your Honor," Rachel concluded, "Mrs. Mitchell isn't having a breakdown. She's having a breakthrough, and Mr. Mitchell's desperate attempt to maintain control over her assets suggests he's more concerned about losing access to her trust fund than about her mental health." The judge, a woman about my age, looked at Richard over her reading glasses. "Motion denied. And Mr. Mitchell? I'm forwarding these financial records to the SEC for review. Those transactions between your corporate and personal accounts raise some interesting questions." Now it was Richard's turn to panic. "Susan," he hissed as I walked past him, "you don't want to do this. Think about Ethan's future." I stopped and turned. In that moment, I saw him clearly. Not the powerful man who'd controlled my life for decades, but a frightened boy who'd built his entire identity on dominating others. "I am thinking about Ethan's future," I said quietly. "It's time he learned that women aren't property. Money isn't love, and actions have consequences." That afternoon, I returned to the Athenaeum and lost myself in the careful work of restoration. As I cleaned centuries of grime from a leather binding, Dr. Chen stopped by my workstation. "Everything okay?" she asked, noting my intense focus. I showed her what I'd discovered. Beneath layers of dirt and failed repairs, the original tooling on the spine was still intact. Delicate golden flowers waiting to be revealed. "Sometimes," I said, gently removing another layer of old adhesive, "what looks like damage is actually protection. All this grime, these misguided repairs, they preserve the gold underneath. We just have to be patient enough to uncover it." She squeezed my shoulder and left me to my work. I stayed late that evening, carefully cleaning away decades of obscurity until the flowers emerged. Still perfect, still shining. With each gentle swab, each careful removal of what no longer served, I felt my own layers of tarnish falling away. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "The SE is investigating Dad's firm because of you. How could you do this to our family?" I took a photo of the book I was restoring, focusing on the newly revealed golden flowers. Beneath it, I typed, "I didn't do anything to our family, Ethan. I simply stopped hiding the truth. Like these flowers, it was there all along. Whether you choose to see it is up to you." Then I returned to my work, letting my skilled hands do what they did best, revealing beauty that had been there all along, waiting to be freed. Spring arrived in Boston with a burst of cherry blossoms and possibility. 3 months into my position, at the Athenaeum, I'd found my rhythm, splitting time between hands-on conservation work and teaching volunteers. The Merchant Logs project was progressing beautifully, each restored volume telling its story more clearly than before. One quiet afternoon, as I worked on a particularly delicate spine repair, Dr. Chen approached my workspace with an intriguing proposition. "The Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris has reached out," she said, placing a letter on my desk. "They're hosting a symposium on historical binding techniques this summer. Given your work on the Merchant Logs, we'd like you to represent the Athenaeum." My hand stilled on the book I was repairing. "Paris? 2 weeks in July. The Athenaeum would cover your expenses." She smiled. "I understand you have family planning to be there?" I thought of my mother's plans, our shared dream of walking along the Seine. "Yes, but my certificate program." "Susan," Dr. Chen sat down beside me, "you've accomplished more in 3 months than most students do in a year. Your practical experience here, combined with your previous education, you're already working at a professional level. The program is meant to help you get where you already are." That evening in my new apartment, a small but sunny space near the harbor, I called my mother with the news. "July in Paris!" Mary exclaimed. "Perfect timing. I've already found us a lovely apartment to share in the Marais, near all the best bookshops, of course." As I hung up, a text from Ashley appeared. "I know we're not supposed to be in contact, but Ethan's not doing well. The SEC investigation has everyone stressed. He misses you." I looked around my apartment, at the walls lined with carefully organized conservation tools and the books I was slowly collecting. On my desk sat the journal I'd been keeping, its pages now filled with more dreams than documentation. Beside it, a folder contained brochures from Parisian bookbinding workshops and rare book dealers. "I miss who I thought he was," I replied to Ashley. "But I don't miss who he chose to become." That night, I worked late on my presentation for the symposium, focusing on the intersection of historical techniques and modern conservation science. As I documented the restoration process of the merchant logs, I realized I was telling two stories. One about preserving physical books, and another about preserving oneself. My phone buzzed again. Dr. Chen sharing details about the symposium. Among the attendees would be representatives from various European conservation labs, including a small atelier specializing in rare book restoration near the Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève. I saved their information carefully, a seed of an idea taking root. After all, if I could restore myself after decades of neglect, what else might be possible? Paris in July felt like more than a symposium. It felt like reconnaissance for the next chapter of my story. The week before my departure for Paris, I visited Oliver at Dr. Chen's veterinary clinic. His kidney values had stabilized and he looked healthier than he had in months. As I scratched behind his ears, Dr. Chen shared some unexpected news. "One of our technicians, Sarah, has fallen in love with him," she said, showing me pictures of Oliver curled up in the clinic's sunny window seat. "She's asked if she could adopt him permanently. She has experience with special needs cats, and her apartment is perfect for senior pets." I watched Oliver purring contentedly in his bed, more relaxed than he'd ever been in our tension-filled house. Like me, he'd found his place to thrive. "Could I visit sometimes?" "Of course. Sarah suggested setting up video calls too, so you can see him whenever you're in Paris." Paris. The word still felt like a spell, a promise, a dream crystallizing into reality. I signed the adoption papers with the same sense of rightness I'd felt signing my divorce papers months earlier. Some endings were really beginnings in disguise. Back at my apartment, I sorted through the last of my belongings. The movers had already taken most items to storage, but a few boxes remained, things I'd saved for last because they required particular decisions. My wedding album went to Ethan's storage unit, along with photo albums from his childhood. Rachel had arranged the delivery. "He may not want them now," she'd advised, "but someday he might." I kept only one photo. Ethan at his college graduation before money and status had hardened him, when pride in his accomplishments still looked like joy rather than entitlement. My conservation tools, books, and work materials were carefully packed for international shipping. The Athenaeum had arranged for them to arrive at the small Parisian atelier, where I'd be doing some consulting work after the symposium, a trial period that could lead to something more permanent. The last item was my leather journal, now nearly full. Its pages chronicled my journey from breakdown to breakthrough, from invisible wife to respected conservator. I'd documented everything: the gaslighting, the financial manipulation, the emotional abuse, but also the triumph, the recovery, the rebirth. I added one final entry. Some books are too damaged to restore. The cost of repair exceeds the value of the result. But some books, the rare ones, The precious ones, the ones that contain unique and irreplaceable stories, are worth every moment of careful conservation. The same is true of people, of lives, of dreams. Today I received the final divorce decree. Richard's company is still under SEC investigation. Ethan has moved back home, his credit cards cancelled, his trust fund depleted. They're facing the consequences of their choices, while I'm facing the horizon of mine. Tomorrow I fly to Paris, not as an escape, but as an arrival. In my carry-on, I'll have a new journal, its pages blank and waiting. But this one, the record of my restoration, I'm leaving with my mother. Keep it safe, I told her. Someday, another woman might need to read it. She understood. After all, she'd been quietly preserving my future all along, waiting for the day I'd be ready to claim it. Like the books I restore, my story needed time, skill, and patience to emerge. The damaged pieces needed to be carefully removed. The structure strengthened, the truth revealed beneath years of mishandled care. I am no longer a book locked away in someone else's library. I am my own story now, and Paris is just the beginning. The June sun painted Paris in shades of gold as I walked along the Pont des Arts. In my bag, I carried a small brass lock and a permanent marker. Not the typical tools of a book conservator, but perfect for what I had in mind. My mother stood beside me, her camera ready. After 20 years of quiet strength, of building my safety net thread by thread, she deserved to witness this moment. We'd spent the morning exploring the rare bookshops of the Latin Quarter, where I'd already spotted several volumes that would benefit from my conservation skills. "Here," I said, stopping at a spot along the railing. Below us, the Seine flowed steadily, centuries of stories carried in its waters. I took out the lock, not a fancy one, just a simple brass padlock I'd bought at a hardware store in Boston. With careful strokes, I wrote my name on its surface. Susan Mitchell. Not Susan Thompson, Richard's carefully curated wife, but Susan Mitchell, book conservator, independent woman, author of her own story. "Ready?" my mother asked, positioning her phone for a photo. I fastened the lock to the bridge and held up the key. In that moment, I thought about everything it represented. The keys to our house in Boston, the key to Richard's study where he'd kept the financial documents, the key to the china cabinet where I'd stored the fancy dishes used only when his colleagues came to dinner. All those locks that had kept me bound to a life that wasn't truly mine. "For 20 years, I said to my mother's camera, I preserved everyone's life but my own. Today I'm locking away that chapter and starting a new one." I released the key. It caught the sunlight as it fell, then disappeared into the Seine with a distant splash. My mother lowered her phone, tears in her eyes. "Welcome home, sweetheart. Home. Not a perfectly maintained house in suburban Boston, but a small apartment near the Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève, where I'd soon begin my work at the restoration atelier. Not a life of invisible service, but one of visible accomplishment. Not a story written by others, but my own narrative, carefully conserved and restored. My phone buzzed. A message from Sarah, with a video of Oliver lounging in his new window seat, contentedly watching Paris pigeons. Another buzz brought an email from Dr. Chen. The Athenaeum's board had approved my remote consulting arrangement, meaning I could continue advising on the Merchant Logs project while building my new life in Paris. A final message came through. Ashley, sharing that Ethan had enrolled in financial counseling. "He's starting to understand," she wrote. "Your journal. He found it in storage with the photo albums. He's reading it." I smiled and turned off my phone. My story was out there now, preserved in those pages, ready to help others find their strength. But this moment belonged to the future, not the past. The atelier interviewed a young apprentice yesterday. I told my mother as we walked toward the Marais. She reminds me of myself at that age. Passionate about conservation, full of dreams. They've asked me to mentor her. The student becomes the teacher. My mother nodded. That's how wisdom is preserved. Evening was falling over Paris, the sunset turning building façades to rose gold. Somewhere in the city, my tools waited to be unpacked, ready to begin their work of restoration. But they would restore more than just books now. They would help restore other lives, other dreams, other stories waiting to be freed. A street musician's accordion played a cheerful tune, and the scent of fresh bread wafted from a nearby boulangerie. I breathed it all in, feeling the rightness of this moment, this place, this new chapter. Like the books I would soon restore, I had emerged from my own careful conservation, my binding strengthened, my story preserved, my truth finally revealed. And now, standing in the heart of Paris, with my mother beside me, and my future ahead, I was ready to begin writing the next page. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Give it a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.